What we're seeing is that regional product types continue to lead the way in low vacancy. We've got a vacancy rate of sub 5% in regional centers. Not too surprising when you consider the fact that during a questionable retail period like this, there's a flight to quality. And one of the things you find in a regional center, in addition to quality, is co-tenancy and location. And that location is important to retailers more now than ever before. Convenient access to rooftops, co-tenancy with other retailers, and the synergy that's created in a regional center is vital. What's worth noting here, though, is that we're also seeing community centers and anchorless centers, as well as neighborhood on this graph. And as we see more and more retailers seek drive-through locations, the vacancy rates in community and neighborhood centers will continue to creep up. It's worth noting, too, here that these vacancy rates are near a historic high. As we look on this chart all the way back to 2013, we've never seen vacancy rates approach 7%. And I see this trend continuing as we look into 2021. Yeah, this is perhaps the most telling graph of all the retail graphs that we're looking at today. Obviously, we see lots of construction and lots of absorption happening in the south end of the valley. Retail follows rooftops, and as a result, we see over 100,000 square feet absorbed in the southwest quadrant, where most of those rooftops are being built, and some in the southeast and even central west quadrants. What's really compelling is this graph shows the northeast, northwest, and central east quadrants at negative absorption. I believe a lot of this has to do with the fact that many retail projects are being repurposed. There have been very few new construction projects in Salt Lake County, other than what we see in the southwest and southeast quadrants. It's even more evident as we look at the northeast, northwest, and southeast quadrants, where the projects that have been built are primarily residential in nature. Although some of these projects have some type of retail component, the retail has been slow to lease up, and the absorption numbers reflect that. The other number that isn't shown here are the build-to-suits that are taking place for many of these fast food restaurants and quick serves. Oftentimes they're done directly with developers, and they're not reflected or tracked in our retail data. So a lot of that new construction activity relating to fast food, quick serve, fast casual, where there's a drive-through involved, isn't being shown here. Yeah, I think we can just focus all our attention again on the regional centers here. Where there is increased demand, you'll obviously see an increased asking rate. In this case, we're showing regional centers with an asking rate of just over $25 per square foot, while community, anchorless, and neighborhood centers kind of weigh that average down. You're seeing lease rates creep up from a low in 2019. However, that number will most likely stay where it is or drop as we look at 2021. The average asking lease rate does not reflect the lease rates being paid by fast food and fast casual groups. Oftentimes, those deals are done as build-to-suits or reverse build-to-suits, and as such, we don't see or track that asking rate. What I can say is that we're in uncharted territory for those types of deals, and I wouldn't be surprised if we were tracking that data to see a lease rate in excess of $35 per square foot for that type of product. Another number that isn't being tracked here in the average asking lease rate is the ground lease rent that we're seeing associated with these types of deals. And again, we're in an unprecedented time when it comes to ground leases and pad sales. Retail is ever changing. You see that in the article in the NAIOP magazine. 85% of new construction is happening in the southwest quadrant of the valley. This is not a surprise to anyone, and we know that's where all the residential growth is. The same is occurring in Utah County, where the residential growth is taking place. That's where we're seeing the retail construction. This is primarily driven by grocery-anchored centers and Costco and large big box users like that. We've seen very little construction in all other parts of the valley. You're seeing new construction in the northeast quadrant, reflected here is about 12% of total construction. And in my opinion, that's a direct number associated with that residential construction that's taking place that has a retail component. So again, it is retail construction, but not at all similar to the retail construction we're seeing in the southwest part of the valley. There has been a significant adjustment to cap rates in the retail sector. Cap rates follow interest rates. In this crazy 1031 environment, we're also seeing investors fly to quality investments, primarily single tenant net leased investments. I think this continues. Again, those retailers and restaurants who have found a way to survive this pandemic are going to excel as we move forward. And that type of product class or asset type will be more and more valuable as we move on into 2021 and 2022. Again, much of the cap rate has to do with current interest rate markets. So as long as the interest rate markets remain where they are, we're going to see cap rates remain low.
So here's an interesting thought about that question. 5 years ago, the question was totally different. 5 years ago, the question was, how is brick and mortar going to survive the internet business? Now the question is how are retailers going to further integrate online sales? And that's the answer is in the question, is that they're going to further integrate. Think about your own shopping habits. As you're walking into a retailer, a lot of the time you are looking online at the retailer's website, and you're going to purchase that item on that retailer's website, whether it be Target or Walmart or whoever, and then you're going to receive it the next day or within 3 days. Just recently, I was at Best Buy, and I sat and I was talking to the assistant or the sales assistant, and he said, "Hey, this is the cord you want, but let's buy it online because you can actually get it cheaper." And it was a foot longer. And so I thought that was really interesting that brick and mortar is integrating even further internet sales. And we're going to just continue to see that. Well, I think repurposing is inevitable. What's interesting is over time, you start to see that what used to be the main of retail sections within a community, it moves, it shifts. Main used to be in one spot, but as the community grows, as population shift, as new office comes in, new industrial, what have you, retail shifts and retail moves. And the greatest challenge that retail has right now is the idea from either a developer or a municipality that what used to be main of retail, they're trying to hold on to that, and for tax purposes, for whatever, but they're trying to hold on to that. And that's our biggest challenge in repurposing, is that retail, again, it evolves, it moves, it shifts, and as main shifts down the street or to a different city or to a different section of town, the repurposing is inevitable, because what used to be that main no longer exists. Retailers are looking for the new hot spot, and so it's just part of the cycle.
My favorite professor at business school, he said this. He said, "Retail is not overbuilt, it's under-demolished." Now, I think that that was a little bit of a doom and gloom scenario, but it is true when you compare the amount of retail square footage per capita in America, dramatically higher than any other place in the world. Now, part of that probably has to do with how we operate and live our lives, but I do believe there's probably too much retail. Place like Utah, though, is slightly different because we still have growth. And people still want a place to buy their groceries and eat and whatever. So as long as there's growth in Utah, I still see future retail demand. But that's the redevelopment lens is one that we use to look at all of our properties. And so we're looking at certain properties that have been a shopping center for 50 years. Some that we've even owned for 50 years that my grandpa purchased, and saying, okay, is this the highest and best use in the future? And often the answer is no. It may be in a great redevelopment corridor. And so we're now saying, okay, why don't we start timing our leases? Why don't we start looking at shorter term debt, have some flexibility that when we want to, we can initiate a redevelopment and go non-retail. That's definitely happening, conversion to non-retail. And I think you're seeing that with other people too. Look at the Gateway. Almost all the retail tenants have left, and a lot of people thought, okay, that property is toast, but they're slowly revitalizing that center and going non-retail. I look at Recursion, which was the really big biotech group that moved down there. They were actually our tenant up at Research Park. They came to us and said, hey, I need 80,000 square feet of office space. We can't do it there. So they moved off campus, and they took a Dick's Sporting Goods with a 3-story climbing wall, and now that's a high-end, high-tech lab space. Go figure. For me, I think the takeaway is that as long as the economy is thriving and there's job growth, there will be a future use for all these retail centers. I totally believe that. Look at like Dan Young, the PC Laptops guy. He went in and bought this big box center in Midvale, and he said, okay, there's not demand for this whole big box, but there is for a portion of it. So he took the back 2/3, turned it into his manufacturing space, and took the front amount and leased it as retail, and it's worked. So what impact will that have on the economy? I think it has an impact in a variety of ways. I think it impacts cities. A lot of cities are funded through sales tax. So they're gonna have to look to alternate uses to fund their budgets, which probably means that services or property taxes are gonna go up. They gotta plug the gap somehow. I think that another pinch point is with tenants. Traditional soft good retailers historically have had really tight restrictions in their leases on who can go into their shopping centers. They have to be similar soft good retailers. We're slowly seeing that start to change. That's often the biggest impediment to go non-retail in our shopping centers are the existing tenants' leases. But yeah, I think that paradigm is shifting. We just did a Burlington deal last year, and we had vacant land in an all-retail shopping center, and we said, hey, look, we're not gonna be building any more retail. And they said, yeah, that probably makes sense. And they said, okay, right next to you, we're gonna build an apartment building. Historically, they would have said, hell no. But they said, yes, that's fine, go ahead and do it. It's more customers. So I slowly think that paradigm is shifting. What happens to rents? I think a lot of cases rents will probably decrease, that the alternate non-retail uses probably can't support the same rents, but not always. We have a mall in southern Idaho, and 2 of the anchors in the mall left, and you think, oh, that's the death of the mall. But we're actually to release them, and we nearly doubled our rents. One thing about malls that's unique is those anchor tenant deals are so low rents. They're often just paying property taxes. You can almost release them for anything and be better off. So what's gonna happen with rents? I don't know. What happens to the economy? Once again, I almost think that the retail space will get repurposed, but it's almost a greater question about what's happening in the broader economy.
Well, that's a really interesting question because that is the headline, right? Record number of store closings. What's interesting about that is that I feel like we are really fortunate in Utah. Yes, we have seen some closures, but we haven't seen nearly the same amount of closures that other states have across the country. We are really lucky in Utah that we haven't seen that number of closures. The interesting thing is that in 2020, we saw mostly closures from some big box retailers. JCPenney's, Macy's, Bed Bath & Beyond. And what I have discovered over the 20 plus years that I've been in retail is that retail just reinvents itself. And that's what's so amazing about retail is, yes, we see closures, but that's the same story that's been happening ever since I've been in the industry, is that stores close, retailers reinvent themselves. So what's happening with some of those big box retailers is redevelopment. They're reinventing themselves. A lot of times we are seeing that they're subdividing those big box retailers, putting in different types of users. We see entertainment, we see fitness, and so that is what's backfilling those. The other element that is happening with some of those is just the repurposing of those locations.
Now, to answer that question, I think it's interesting for me to reflect on 2020 for our company. I think there's definitely a perception that retail is dead or dying, but I can tell you our experience has been contrary to that feeling. In our 101-year history, we had the best year ever in new commercial leasing in 2020, which for us sort of came to a surprise. And a lot of that actually is in a few large office deals that moved the dial that direction. But even taking those outliers out, the retail leasing activity was solid. A little bit below perhaps previous years, but still very encouraging. It died off, in April and May, but then slowly came back. And we actually feel a decent trajectory now moving ahead into the future. So who are those groups? I'd put them in 3 categories. One category are tenants who have benefited from COVID. And there's another category of tenants who we think have been slammed by COVID, but in actuality have not. And there's a third category of groups that have been slammed by COVID, but think it will be better in the future and are making decisions accordingly or actually expanding. So who are those groups that have been benefited by COVID? Sporting goods retailers, by far. I mean, they're having barn-busting years. We work with several in our portfolio, and what we're hearing is some of them have sales in 2020 that were up 100%. So just amazing years. You think bikes, hunting, outdoor gear, consumer spending in America, retail sales overall, e-commerce, everything combined, are slightly up. But we're not spending on services, we're spending on goods. A lot of that is e-commerce, but a lot of that's still happening in bricks and mortar. So all those retailers are doing well and wanting to expand and working with several. Home improvement as a category is doing well. And like Ace Hardware is expanding right now, so there are groups within that. Food, we might talk about food later, but certain categories of food are definitely expanding. Obviously, anything with the drive-thru right now is doing well. Fast food, fast casual, drinks, whether the hot drinks, like coffee, cold drinks, sodas, those groups have had wonderful years and are continuing to expand. So yes, I think that's sort of the first category, groups that have actually been benefited, because there definitely are some. There's a few that we think, oh yeah, for sure, those guys are dead. But when you talk to them, they're actually doing fine. And one of those groups are entertainment groups. Now, cinemas, I think, are in a world of pain right now. And a lot of that is actually, I think, more a reaction to what's happening outside of Utah, that no film company wants to release a movie right now because so many theaters are closed outside of the state. Or actually, I think they may do okay if they were to release them here, but there's just not inventory. But entertainment, I mean, we've been working with one entertainment group. We signed 2 LOIs. We're about to sign their leases. Big entertainment, 50, 70,000 square feet. Bowling, arcade, and the like. A lot of people think, oh yeah, those groups are doing terribly. Actually, they're doing just fine. And talking to them, the one group in particular, they had to close, in April and March because of COVID. But since reopening, their sales are at par with what they were the previous year. But the composition of those sales have changed. Previously, a lot of their business was derived by group business, right? So birthday parties, corporate events. That's disappeared, but their walk-in traffic has actually increased. So they're looking at the future and saying, hey, our walk-in traffic has increased. We think that might be somewhat permanent. The business traffic or the group business has gone down, but that'll come back once COVID is gone. So the future is actually pretty bright, and some of those groups are actually expanding right now. So the last category, groups that have been negatively impacted, but believe things are going to get better. This one has actually been really surprising. You think, oh, sit-down restaurants are doing terribly. I think for the most part, a lot of them are. But we've had several groups expand, and some of those have been coming from out of state. You know, I was just talking to one and said, hey, I have 3 restaurants in California. I cannot do business here. We talked about people moving here, doing work from home. We've seen people taking their businesses, sit-down restaurant as an example, from California and say, I want to do this in Utah. I know I can operate here. You're seeing that. I mean, fitness has been one thing that's been interesting to me. So many of these fitness people, I think, are hurting right now. So there's fitness groups, like we're talking with one in particular that has a franchise concept. So they're looking at all their locations across America, and they're all down. In California, New York, they've plummeted. They're toast. In Utah, they're just down a little bit. So it's bad everywhere. It's less bad here. They're doubling down and saying something's good about Utah. Let's go expand into Utah. So there definitely are groups, and there's some non-retail tenants as well. You know, we did a big school deal. There's other groups out there that I think we'll talk about converting into non-retail uses that are expanding. So are things perfect? Are they as good as they were before? No, but we actually feel pretty optimistic about the future.
I think the most exciting sector in retail right now is the restaurant industry. When COVID first hit and the world went into panic, everything shut down, sales volumes for restaurants plummeted, like everything. But what we saw shortly after that, only a couple of months after that, was an incredible increase in sales volumes for restaurants, to where we are today, where most restaurateurs, there's 2 categories. There is the sit-down restaurants, then there's what we'd call fast food or quick service. The fast food and quick service restaurants, for the most part, have seen incredible increases in sales volumes. Sit-down restaurants, not so much, just because of the COVID restrictions. However, considering the limited capacity, most of those sit-down restaurant sales are at pre-COVID levels. And so that category in retail is fascinating to watch. And so post-COVID, what's going to happen? I think that we're going to continue to see an increase in sales volumes through those quick service and fast food categories. Those quick serve and fast food categories are getting very creative. They're redesigning their footprints. They're downsizing the seating capacity inside their stores, but they're making drive-throughs quicker. A thing of the past will soon be the single drive-through. I mean, many retailers are already incorporating the double drive-through. That's going to be a mainstay. That will be the new thing. Most of these fast food and quick service restaurants are also implementing pickup stalls, dedicated pickup stalls for the Uber Eats, Grubhub, and those types of players. So fast food, quick service are being innovative, and we're going to continue to see them. Now, on the opposite side, with sit-down restaurants, they're absolutely utilizing pickup, not only from you and I, but their pickup and delivery from Uber Eats and Grubhub and those players. I believe, personally, that I think that we'll see a resurgence of those customers into those sit-down restaurants post-COVID. We're all cooped up. We're all anxious to get out, to connect with one another, to have that dining experience. Once those restrictions are removed, those sales volumes are just going to skyrocket.
I mean, I think anyone who wants to go get food right now knows what's happening currently, that sit-down restaurants are hurting. Anything fast food with the drive-through is doing well. There's really long lines there. The question is, what's going to happen in the future? I think the key question you got to ask yourself is, what consumer behavior has changed? And what portion of that you think is permanent, and what is a response to the fear? So the example I use that's non-retail about behavior that's short-term fear-based is in Manhattan, okay? So in Manhattan, the highest rents were always the top floor of the tallest building. That always commanded the highest rents until 9/11. When 9/11 happened, you couldn't rent that space. The highest rents were low-rise buildings next to a stairwell because everyone was afraid of a plane crashing into their building. But that went away. As soon as the fear was gone, everyone flocked back to the exact same thing. So when I think about food, I think about, okay, has something about this virus fundamentally changed the way that we like to eat, and that we like to have social eating, and that we want to go watch a game with our buddies and get a drink, or go out and date night with your partner? Has something changed about that? No, I think that that's going to come back. So what has changed? And there are definitely things that have changed. I think the ordering experience has changed. Fast food, obviously, drive-throughs are a big thing, but what's really shifted is pickup and takeout. I think restaurants looked at that and wanted to do it more in the past, but people weren't used to having to order in advance and the food being brought to you. What COVID has done is it's forced us to do this. And I do it with my family all the time. I go order on my phone in advance and use someone's app and drive up, and it's actually really easy. But you had to have COVID as a catalyst to make us change the way we order food and get food. So I think that is a permanent change. So I do think that in the future, you're going to see restaurants doing more of that, and it'll be better received because people are used to ordering food that way. So, your fast casual group, I actually probably see a less square footage dedicated to in-store dining. There'll still be, sit-down restaurants, but that's for people who want a different experience. We're seeing that with Cafeteria right now. We're seeing that with Wendy's. They're coming out with concepts that are all drive-through. They don't even have a place to sit down, which is really interesting. And I see that trend continuing into the future. But look, as long as people have a job, they're going to want food. And the percentage we're spending as Americans on food has increased, not decreased. And so is that going to change? Yeah. Once the fear is gone, are people going to go back to these restaurants and bars? I think yes. Can restaurants and bars survive until then? I don't know. A lot of them probably can't, but some are doing just fine.
Yeah, many of the habits that consumers have formed during this pandemic will continue on into 2021, 2022, and on. So our shopping habits, our eating habits, dining in, taking out, going through drive-throughs, seeking a more convenient solution will continue. So retailers will continue to kind of go that direction. We'll see more and more restaurants consider drive-throughs. Restaurants that you never thought would ever make sense of a drive-through will be looking at drive-through options. That'll bring pad sites to a premium, continue to drive ground lease, build-to-suit prices up. The advantage retailers will have going forward over strictly online retail is that as long as they adopt an omni-channel approach and have the ability to sell product online, they can be competitive. But where they can lead the way is by selling and catering to consumers' needs online, but doing it with a human, allowing for returns, allowing for flexibility. There are so many reasons why, as consumers, we still see a need or a desire to shop in brick and mortar, and that won't go away as long as we have the other options available to us.